face against the window, taking in the weathered buildings and the handful of men who paused to watch the coach pass by. She had traveled nearly 3 weeks from Boston, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in this remote Arizona territory. Her mother had called her foolish. Her father had refused to speak to her for 2 days, but Sarah had made up her mind. At 24 years old, she wanted adventure, purpose, and perhaps something she could not quite name. The coach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and the driver climbed down to help her with her 2 modest trunks. Sarah stepped onto the wooden boardwalk, smoothing her traveling dress and adjusting her bonnet against the relentless sun. The heat was unlike anything she had ever experienced, dry and pressing against her skin like a physical weight. She was looking around for someone who might be expecting her when a man on horseback came riding hard down the street. His horse was a magnificent chestnut mare, and he handled her with the easy confidence of someone born in the saddle. He pulled up short when he saw the stagecoach, and his eyes found Sarah almost immediately. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin. His hat was pulled low, but she could see eyes the color of a summer sky, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the very mountains that surrounded this dusty town. He was not handsome in the refined way of the gentleman back east, but there was something about him that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The man dismounted and approached her, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He was perhaps 30 years old, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against the sun. "I reckon you must be the new school teacher," he said. His voice was deep and carried the slow drawl of the territory. "I am Thomas Callahan. The town council sent me to fetch you." Sarah extended her hand, and after a moment of hesitation he took it. His grip was firm but gentle, and she noticed the calluses on his palm. This was a man who worked with his hands. "I am Sarah Mitchell," she replied. "I appreciate you coming to meet me." Thomas nodded and gestured toward her trunks. "I will load these onto the wagon. The boarding house is just down the street. Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable establishment. You will be comfortable there." As he lifted her trunks as though they weighed nothing at all, Sarah found herself watching him with more attention than was proper. She quickly looked away, chiding herself silently. She had not come west to find a husband. She had come to teach children and to build a life of independence. The first weeks in Copper Creek passed in a blur of activity. Sarah threw herself into preparing the small schoolhouse, scrubbing floors and organizing the meager supplies of books and slates. The children came from ranches scattered across the surrounding valley, some riding several miles each morning to attend her classes. They were rough around the edges but eager to learn, and Sarah found herself growing to love each one of them. She saw Thomas Callahan often during those weeks. He ran a cattle ranch a few miles outside of town, but he seemed to find reasons to come into Copper Creek regularly. He would tip his hat to her when they passed on the street, and sometimes he would linger at the general store counter while she selected supplies for her classroom. One afternoon, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the valley, and Sarah found herself trapped in the schoolhouse after dismissing her students. The rain came down in sheets, turning the streets into rivers of mud. She was standing at the window, watching the lightning dance across the distant mountains, when the door opened behind her. Thomas stood in the doorway, water streaming from his hat and coat. His horse was tied outside, head lowered against the deluge. "I saw you had not left yet," he said. "I thought you might need help getting back to town." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his thoughtfulness. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Callahan, but surely the storm will pass soon." He stepped inside and closed the door, removing his hat. "Might not. These storms can last for hours. My ranch is closer than town. You are welcome to wait there until it clears." Sarah knew she should refuse. Proper society would never approve of an unmarried woman going to a man's home unchaperoned. But something in Thomas's eyes told her she could trust him completely, and the rain showed no sign of letting up. She accepted his offer, and he lifted her onto his horse before climbing up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of his body against her back. They rode through the storm together, and Sarah found that she was not afraid at all. The ranch house was modest but well kept, with a covered porch and a stone fireplace that Thomas quickly set to blazing. He gave her a blanket and made coffee while she dried by the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only warmth and the quiet comfort of his presence. They talked for hours that evening, sharing stories of their lives and their dreams. Thomas told her about growing up on this land, about losing his parents to fever when he was just 18 and taking over the ranch alone. He spoke of the loneliness of the frontier, of years spent with only his horses and cattle for company. Sarah told him about Boston, about the expectations that had suffocated her, and the restlessness that had driven her west. She confessed that she'd always felt like she did not quite belong, that she was searching for something she could not name. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that needed no words. The storm continued to rage outside, but neither of them noticed anymore. From that night forward, everything changed between them. Thomas began calling on her properly, taking her for rides through the valley and sharing meals at the boarding house under Mrs. Patterson's approving eye. The town began to talk, as small towns always do, but the gossip was good-natured. Everyone could see that the quiet rancher and the eastern schoolteacher were falling in love. But trouble came to Copper Creek, as it often did to frontier towns. A group of men arrived that autumn, rough characters who claimed to be looking for work but spent their days drinking at the saloon and their nights causing mischief. Their leader was a man named Jack Brennan, and he had a mean look in his eye and a reputation that preceded him. Brennan took an interest in Sarah from the moment he saw her. He would wait outside the schoolhouse when classes ended, offering to escort her home with a smile that never reached his eyes. Sarah refused him politely at first, then firmly, but he would not be discouraged. One evening, as Sarah was walking back to the boarding house, Brennan stepped out of the shadows and blocked her path. His friends flanked him, and there was no one else on the street. "I do not appreciate being told no," he said, reaching for her arm. Before Sarah could cry out, a figure appeared behind Brennan. Thomas moved with a speed she would not have thought possible, pulling Brennan away from her and throwing him against the wall of the nearest building. The lady said no. Thomas growled, "You would do well to listen." Brennan's friends started forward, but they stopped when they saw the determination in Thomas's eyes. He was one man against four, but there was something in him that gave them pause. Brennan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is not finished, rancher." He gathered his men and retreated into the darkness, but Sarah knew he was right. This was not finished at all. The following weeks were tense. Thomas hired extra hands for his ranch and began escorting Sarah everywhere she went. The town marshal, an aging man named Cooper, tried to keep the peace, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before violence erupted. It came on a cold November morning. Sarah was opening the schoolhouse when she heard gunshots from the direction of the main street. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding with fear. Thomas was standing in the street, gun drawn, facing Brennan and two of his men. One man was already on the ground, wounded. Marshal Cooper lay nearby, bleeding from a gunshot to his shoulder. Sarah screamed Thomas's name, and in that moment of distraction, Brennan raised his weapon. But Thomas was faster. 2 shots rang out, and Brennan fell. The remaining gang members fled, and Thomas holstered his gun. He turned to Sarah, and she ran into his arms, not caring who saw. He held her tightly, and she could feel his heart pounding against her cheek. "I could have lost you," she whispered. He pulled back and looked into her eyes. "I will never let anything happen to you, Sarah. Not as long as I draw a breath." That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Thomas asked Sarah to marry him. They were standing on the porch of his ranch house, looking out at the land he had worked his entire life. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was crisp with the coming winter. Sarah said yes without hesitation. She had come west looking for purpose and adventure, but she had found something far greater. She had found love, the kind that only grows in wild places, tempered by hardship and strengthened by devotion. They were married in the spring in the little church at the edge of town. The children from Sarah's school threw wildflowers as they walked down the aisle, and the whole town turned out to celebrate. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears, and even old Marshal Cooper, his arm still in a sling, managed to smile. Sarah continued to teach at the schoolhouse for many years, riding in from the ranch each morning and home each evening to the man she loved. They had 3 children together, 2 boys and a girl, and each one grew up knowing the value of hard work, kindness, and devotion. Thomas Callahan lived to be an old man, his hair turned silver and his face lined with the years, but his eyes never lost their summer blue. He told his grandchildren stories of the frontier, of the dangers they had faced and overcome, of the day an Eastern schoolteacher stepped off a stagecoach and changed his life forever. And Sarah, who had once felt like she did not belong anywhere, found that she had been wrong all along. She had simply been waiting to find the place where she was meant to be. It was not Boston, with its drawing rooms and expectations. It was here, in the wild country, with a man who loved her and a life built on courage and hope. When she was very old, Sarah would sit on the porch of the ranch house and watch the sunset paint the mountains. She would remember that first day, the dust and the heat, and the stranger who had ridden up on a chestnut mare. And she would smile, knowing that every step of her journey had led her exactly where she was supposed to.